doesn't bake.
Gary and Danny, you guys want to talk about, has there been a food revolution? And if so, how would you define it?
You know, there's no question there's been a revolution. We started our company in 1983. Nobody knew what we were talking about. I often say we had a wonderful business back then. We just had no supply and no demand. But the world has changed. I mean, people are demanding transparency. They want it all. They want to trust their foods. They want high quality, produced, whether it's in a restaurant or by a processor or from a farm. They want it produced by somebody they trust. Trust in institutions is generally down, but trust in food companies in particular is really down. People don't trust companies to protect their interests, and I think there's been plenty of reasons. The word natural really doesn't mean much at all anymore. So there's been a lot of fuel. By every measure, statistically, Hartman Group shows now 69% of consumers are choosing local whenever they can in the last 12 months. It's no longer just in the top foodie markets. This began in New York and San Francisco some time ago, but now it's it's everywhere. 63% of Generation Y has bought organic now on a regular basis. That's up 17 points.
I was going to take a different tack than what Gary took, which is that if your question is there or has there been a food revolution, the answer is incontrovertibly yes. And I think that the first evidence is the fact that people like us chose to get into this business in the first place, because none of us, maybe with one exception here, was brought up to say what my son, the future lawyer, should really do is open a restaurant, or what my son, the future doctor, should really do is start a brewery, or an iced tea company, or whatever. And I think that the first thing that happened was that food became a viable and validated entrepreneurial pursuit in a way that people theretofore, I think, were almost embarrassed to even consider. Mm-hmm. And so that was step number one. We opened Union Square Cafe 2 years after Stonyfield began, 1985. And I had a lot of splaining to do. I had a lot of splaining to do with my family, with my friends. This is not what you were brought up to do. How could you do this? And Seth and I were having a conversation at lunch just before this. We both happened to be poli-sci majors, government majors. And I think that food became another avenue to expressing that you cared about making the world a better place. Mm-hmm. It's just that the means by which you could do it did not have to be via government, did not have to be via... You could become a public advocate based on how you ran your business. The last thing I'll say is that I don't think I fully appreciated, even back then, that the choice of food was a political choice. I think I was brought up as a hedonist, and I just always found that the most hedonistic way to enjoy food happened to coincide with the most local, the most seasonal. And I think that I've gotten my own education from farmers in the Union Square Green Market, from people like Gary Hirshberg, from companies like Whole Foods, who have shown that commerce and politics and the responsibility to bring both commerce and politics along for the ride with each other is not only very possible, but it's almost mandatory as you look forward.
That's interesting. Myra?
Yeah.
What's your take on this? I mean, you've been around the whole time, really, and Earthbound Farm has obviously grown tremendously. What's your take on all this?
Well, you know, it's interesting because Danny talked it a little bit more from the entrepreneur perspective. I think that I look at it a little bit more from the consumer perspective. And, when we started Earthbound Farm in '84, and my husband and I are both from New York City, I was just 20 and he was 23. Our choice to go organic, what was really that we were just, when we learned about all the chemicals that were used in farming that were meant to kill insects and weeds and diseases, we were just personally afraid to use these chemicals and eat food grown with them. And we didn't want to sell this food from our roadside stands to our consumers. And people back then thought we were pretty crazy. There were very few people that were outspoken about the dangers of conventional food and conventional agriculture. And I think that back then there was a lot of trust in the federal government. If a pesticide was allowed, it must be safe. There was trust in these food companies that if someone's making this product, this TV dinner that I grew up with, it's got to be healthy. And I think over the 3 decades that I have been in business, as we've seen Americans get sicker and sicker and fatter and have so many health problems and cancer rates going up, I think people have become so aware of the connection between health and food, and bad health and bad food, and that you can really improve your health with your diet. And I really think that social media has really changed the game, because back when we started, all the advertising was in magazines and in newspapers, and it was the people.
And we were happy with that.
There's so much information available to consumers. I just published a vegan cookbook, so I'm on Amazon seeing how it's doing, and I'm seeing, just huge interest in vegan diets and paleo diets, and everybody, when they have a health problem, they're looking to their diet. Not everyone, but a lot of people are looking to their diet first. And then the last thing I want to say is, in the old days, we never, like our VP of marketing would never let us mention the environment in our ads in magazines, because they said that people aren't concerned about the environment, and people who are buying organic are just buying organic because they're afraid of pesticides. And I think finally people have really gotten climate change is a huge issue. Our food choices really do make an impact, and people are caring more about how their food is produced, for their health, for the environment. And there's a lot of awareness now, and I think social media has been a big part of it, about humanely raised animals and animal products, and there's concern about that too. So I think that this consumer-to-consumer conversation and all this anecdotal evidence of how much healthier people feel eating a healthier diet has really had an impact.
That's great. Ari, you have an interesting perspective on this, because in addition to the deli, of course, you've got Zingtrain, and a lot of people from the specialty foods business come through there, and you also do an awful lot of talking. So what's your perspective on this?
Well, I think it's all true, and I think there's also whole parts of the country that wouldn't even know what we were talking about. In many ways, I'm guessing many of us live in my bubble, and I like my bubble, and we've worked hard for 32 years to make it. In our world, without question, people are much more interested in traditionally made food, much more interested in food that tastes better. They don't mind spending money for it. They, are going to farmers markets. They're, much more focused on all the things everybody's talked about. That said, there's a lot of people eating at McDonald's and Jack in the Box, and there's people I know that are in the business world that aren't in the food world that, they still don't think twice about stopping at the airport and grabbing a nice big meal. And personally, I'd rather just not eat. So I think it's definitely changed drastically, and Gary's way more focused on the statistics, and so that's really helpful. What I really know is sort of our customers, and there's just no question. The cheeses that were, really high end when we opened in '82 now are, sort of mass market supermarket offerings. So, and that's true with everything. I just did a talk on the history of olive oil in North America. When we opened, just getting an extra virgin olive oil was like a radical act. Today, most every mainstream supermarket has some. It's not very good and may not be 100% authentic, but at least people think they're buying it. Whereas the stuff that was sort of pretty good when we opened, we wouldn't even carry anymore because the market has evolved so much.
Steve, you have a different perspective on this.
Well, I can identify with what Gary said about 1983 having no market for his product. When I started selling Brooklyn Lager in New York City in '88, a lot of people almost spit it out. You know, they said, my God, it's so dark and bitter. Why don't you make a beer like Heineken? And I remember saying, well, Heineken does a pretty good job with Heineken. I'm doing something different. And today, Brooklyn Lager is considered pretty much a mainstream entry-level craft beer. And craft brewers are now more than 10% of the U.S. market, a huge $100 billion market for beer. And actually, overall beer consumption has gone down radically in the United States. In the last 10 years, the last 5 years, the large brewers have lost about 20 million barrels of production. That's 10% of U.S. production. So people are drinking less beer, but they're drinking better beer, like Brooklyn Lager and all the products we produce and the other craft brewers produce. I just wrote a book about the history of craft beer called The Craft Beer Revolution. So definitely it's not a fad, it's here to stay. And now the big guys are starting to copy what we're doing and realizing it's the only growing part of the beer industry in the US. And that's a challenge to us, but it's also a compliment to what we've done over the last 25, 30 years.
Seth,
Hi, Bo.
how does the food revolution look like from your corner of the world?
Yeah. Well, our corner of the world is really interesting because we're kind of at the nexus where the small meets the big, and
Right.
us being the small, Coca-Cola being the big.
Right.
And we really are. I think what all the comments people are saying, people are connecting the dots,
Yeah.
and they want to connect the dots. So
Yeah.
they want to understand how the environment plays a role. They want to understand who's involved. For us, all the way down picking the tea leaves.
Really?
And then all the way through to the other side, what happens to the package, where it's going, and as Gary likes to say, there's no such thing as a way. So where does it go once it's done? All of those things. And so what I think is interesting is that I see how the bigger food companies get it. They understand this change, and they're seeing.
Well, you see it because Coke.
Exactly.
You're now owned by Coca-Cola.
That's right.
So you see it. You see how you're impacting them.
Yeah, and what I've seen is that they've really embraced this change. They have to, because it's going to happen with them or without them.
Right.
And so it's very easy, I think, from an activist perspective, and I consider myself an activist,
Right.
to feel like here come the big companies and they're going to, one way to see it is they're going to sort of try to trample this thing or take it over. The other, but I don't see that happening. What I see them is there is a fragmentation going on, and rather than be passed by, I see the big companies understand it. They have to be nimble. They have to be, call it more organic, sort of small O. They have to be able to connect with micro, groups of consumers, micro groups of retailers, and so there's a fragmentation going on that, in a lot of ways, it may not change the power big companies have, but it'll change the way their power looks, the role they play. They have to think small and nimble.
But also, it's a tricky business for them, because
Absolutely.
the more they promote products like yours, which are very natural and flavorful, the more they undercut those giant brands that are the basis for their. I mean, same thing in the brewing industry.
Yeah.
The big guys are making craft-like beers now,
Yeah.
and that is actually feeding the decline of their big brands, because the big brands are not about flavor and the story behind the product.
Right.
Seth, I'm just wondering, with like HonestTea and Coca-Cola, do you think, because you know how Ari talked about, well, in his little world, you've got enlightened people, but for the majority of the country, things are really different. I mean, do you think that Coca-Cola, that these values and this strategy that they're applying to HonestTea and Odwalla and these smaller brands are to really address the more enlightened consumers, and they're still kind of the status quo for the majority of Americans, or do you really see it filtering all the way through all their products? I don't know if I said that well, but I hope you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean, and I think I would change it the other way. I wouldn't say Coca-Cola is applying their values to HonestTea. I'd say HonestTea is applying our values to the beverage business, and Coca-Cola is benefiting from it. So I don't think Coca-Cola is, intrinsically a company trying to create more demand for organic beverages, but they're supporting HonestTea's distribution and growth. And as a result of what we're doing, when we become larger, we're helping to create more demand for organic beverages. So I think because they're willing to embrace different approaches to the business, they are in fact bringing more organic to people who wouldn't have access to organic. We talk about democratizing organics. For us, that means not just selling healthy food to healthy people. It means selling products with these attributes to people who wouldn't have had access to them before.
Okay, now we haven't heard from the new face of the food revolution. Now they've heard from all the gray beers.
Yeah. What do I think?
What do you think? What do you see?
I mean, obviously, at Blue Apron, we think about a lot of the things that everyone here is talking about health and transparency in food and supply chains. The one thing that people haven't been talking about is that food, I think, is just more fun than it's been before in the past. And, you look at things like that are going on with the Food Network and with celebrity chefs, and food is a lot more of an aspirational consumer thing than it used to be in the past. And in our business, which is, our customers are actually part of our product. We deliver recipes and ingredients and then they cook at home. A lot of what we sell is that experience of cooking and being closer to your food and having fun while doing it, trying new things, trying new recipes, trying new ingredients, and that variety is actually just something that people find fun. And I think that's also what's driving a lot of the innovation in food products. It's that there's just greater interest than there ever has been before in food, and it's now an aspirational thing. It's not just about how do I get full, healthily, and inexpensively.
What are the demographics of Blue Apron?
So we have a really broad customer base. Our biggest group of customers are couples today. So young professional couples, people with young kids, parents whose kids have grown up and left the house and are back to cooking for two again and are trying to have fun in the kitchen and learn new recipes and techniques. Families are also a portion of our customer base, but they're a smaller portion today.
Mm-hmm. How many cities do you sell?
We actually deliver to 85% of the whole country. So we're not city-based. We have regional centers, and we source regionally to our centers and deliver those across the country. We're missing a little strip in the middle right now that we're solving hopefully by the end of the year.